So everyone, I've met many of you, but not all of you. So just briefly to introduce myself, I'm Christine. I'm here at Findhorn Foundation. I've been living here for 7 years. I'm also the executive director of the Holistic Centers Network. So I'm hosting this call in that capacity. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Doshin to all of you. I'm delighted that he said yes to hosting this webinar. And yeah, thank you, Doshin. And just briefly, so I first met Doshin a year ago. He was invited to give a talk at the foundation, literally 12 months ago. And then he was back again just last month, and I joined a 7-day silent retreat with him, which was my first introduction to Zen Buddhism, although I have followed the Theravadan path previously to that. And it was quite an incredible experience. What I remembered from Doshin when I first met him was his sense of humor. What I really remember, hi Dennis, welcome. What I really recall from this retreat was his honesty and his deep caring. But I really loved the form of the Zen retreat. And also it's unique because it's integral Zen. The retreat actually followed on from the call that we had, the dialogue we had with Ken Wilber and Doshin in the Universal Hall at Findhorn on the 6th of October, which was dedicated to the transformational communities of tomorrow. And this webinar is like a follow-on from that dialogue. And it just feels really timely. Every time we come together, every gathering that we have, we know we share many challenges between our centers. And I do think that Doshin has a lot to offer us around this. But it's an open invitation to explore, to connect, to get to know each other. Welcome, Tatiana. So that's enough from me. And Doshin, it's over to you for the rest of the call.
Wonderful. Well, the first thing I'd like to do is lead with bodhicitta. Rinpoche transmitted this to me with deep caring. So this deep, selfless caring that motivates us all from absolute clarity. How can we go wrong if we always begin from this silence, this clarity, with this caring? And then I'd like to just really appreciate the work that all of you have been doing for years. You know, the leading us into inner transformation and exploring the vast universe behind our eyes and between our ears in the diverse ways that you've done that. And so this is where I'd like to begin, and then open. You know, it's one thing to really appreciate what has been brought into the world because of the actions and the intentions of communities like yours and people like you. And then it's another thing to evaluate where we are and what are the problems that we face and how can we be open, honest, vulnerable, and real about these problems so that solutions can appear and manifest in our lives, in our communities. So I'd really like this to be an open conversation, an open inquiry. I have prepared some slides, so if we blog down, I can certainly pull them out. Death by PowerPoint, I'm really good at that. But do we really want to go there? It might be interesting. But, and we might only get to one slide and then a conversation will break out, which is what we're really after. And I think I would like to begin with just the first 2 slides to set the stage for the conversation that I just outlined. And then I want to shut up and listen.
Okay.
So let me just do that. Let me show 2 slides to you. And that's the last one. That's not the one we wanted. I lied. There'll be 3 slides. There's this one. Holistic Center Network, shining the light on our cultural blind spots. I pulled that right out of the email. I think it's a wonderful topic. And then deep gratitude and appreciation for all of these centers that are part of the Holistic Center Network, for being the leading edge and doing these things, re-enchanting the world after the desolation of modernity. You know, the age of industrialization, the age of science, left such a wasteland. And it required opening a new frontier of this vast inner world, reintroducing the importance of emotions and the soul, and the journey of the soul, raising collective consciousness around the need for human dignity and more equal rights, recognizing and elevating diversity as a moral issue, highlighting the individual and culturally sanctioned greed endemic in modern commerce, and illuminating the problems and dangers of man-made hierarchies. These are some of the things that communities like yours have really been championing, and it's made an incredible difference. And I deeply bow to all of you. And now let's shift into common challenges, and we could say dysfunctions. And here, I'm just going to put them up, and then we'll open the floor. You know, problems, collaborative decision making is not an easy thing. And there seems to be a uber sensitivity, which is a good thing, but has it gone too far? Has it become a problem rather than a boon? An emphasis on feelings, a lack of accountability, a rejection of all hierarchies, even the positive growth hierarchies, and a limited financial sustainability. So these are the problems when I look, and these are the ones that Christine mentioned in her email, so apparently she sees some of these. She sees a lot more than these. I've had conversations with her, and I do too. But these are really important ones. Now I have to figure out how to stop sharing. Christine,
just at the bottom of your screen, I think. Start. Yes. Great.
So that's where I shut up and start listening.
Well, I would like to make the list longer.
Wonderful.
Just as if this isn't enough to cover. But 2 others that popped to mind was what I would call compassion versus capitalism. Because we struggle with that, you know, the desire to help, of course, and at the expense of sustainability from a financial standpoint. And the other is the tension between tradition and what I would call entrepreneurship. We've always done it that way. This is who we are, but times are changing, audiences are changing. You know, how are we changing? So just not sure if it's helpful, but
well, I think it's very illustrative. I'm noticing that you're really highlighting polarities. You know, polarities that dynamically come alive as opposition and tensions in an organization that can, people polarize one camp and the other, and then there's a war. So I really salute that.
These are great points to add, Dennis, and I'd just like to suggest to all of us, maybe because especially Kodo and Doshin are new to our circle, and not everyone knows Erin and Michelle, if we can just give a brief introduction to ourselves and our centers, just literally a one-liner when we begin our contribution to the call, I think that would be great. Do you want to add something, Dennis, just briefly about the Haven?
Sure. We're a personal and professional development center with core programs that deal with relationships, communications. We like to say we're the art of living well together.
Thank you.
Do we just do popcorn style?
Yeah, go for it, Tatiana.
My name is Tatiana, and I work at Esalen Institute, and we are a center for personal and social transformation and human potential. And I work in human resources.
Well, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Peter, and I'm with Brighton Bush Hot Springs here in Oregon, west coast of USA. And I would characterize the work that we do very similar to what Tatiana just said, what Dennis just said. We're working with just all of the elements that come up that have to do with personal and social transformation. I like to say that we're more involved in human potential than we are in human pathology. So how do we fulminate that in our own lives, and how do we offer that to the many thousands of people who come every year to visit us at Brighton Bush?
Hi, I'll go. This is Retna from Mount Madonna Center. And we are evolving from a place that used to host many diverse programs to more of a place where we host rentals, people who come and want to use the facilities. And we're starting to emphasize more yoga, which is our main tradition, and Ayurveda, the health science of India, and working on getting WASC accreditation in those areas and becoming part educational institute as well as transformational holistic center.
Cool.
Cameron, Michelle.
I'm Michelle, and I work at Retreat Guru, and I was a co-founding member of Clear Sky Retreat Center, and we're part of the Tibetan lineage, and we really want to help people wake up more quickly and offer a space for other spiritual groups to do their work to further their spiritual development.
And I'm Cameron, co-founder of Retreat Guru. I always kind of stumble at these introductions because we're not a center, but we're sort of at the nexus of many centers. Our company is in service of retreat centers to provide support in a number of ways to help them with reaching out to finding the right people to come on to their offerings, as well as to provide innovative back-end administrative support. So we talk to so many centers. It's just actually what we do. As you guys talk to participants, we talk to centers. So I'm really interested about, and we also have our own, because we're, as Dennis was mentioning, there's like this contrast between innovation and we are a startup, so we are trying to redefine. Because we're sort of capitalizing on this opportunity of being a new entity, it's like, what are we in today's world? And we're so, because we are networked with so many centers that are very mindful. So we're trying different structures like flat decision-making structures in our company, where people are empowered right from the beginning. They don't have to ask permission, they just have to ask advice. It's kind of like I liken it to like the Dharmic transmission. Like, you already are awake. You don't need anyone's permission, but now you have to discover the path of that. And so we have our own challenges too, working with that scenario. Maybe we could, after we get into the introductions, we could talk a little bit about what we've been experiencing.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cameron.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm also at Esalen, Tatiana did a nice introduction for us. So I'm here in our projects team.
Great, welcome. And Coda.
Well, so Doshen gave the introduction. I'm trying to put an organization underneath Integral Zen so that this character can make more trouble.
He is a great troublemaker.
He is indeed. And it's wonderful to be with y'all. I mean, it's just what a pleasure to be with this particular group of people. Thank you.
Thank you. And just briefly to say, so the Findhorn Foundation, we recently refined our vision or our mission to be transforming consciousness in everyday life to bring new possibilities into the world. I question if we're really doing that. I've come up with a new phrase, which I heard at Doshin talk, which I couldn't remember for a while. I just kept hearing it and I'm like, what's that phrase? Performative contradiction. I think we are definitely making a difference in the world. How much we're transforming consciousness, I question, but I think we are brilliant at opening hearts. And that is one of our gifts to the world. And,
Wonderful. And I'm Doshen Roshi. I'm a lineage holder in Renzai Zen. I've founded an organization called Integral Zen, which takes the teaching of two of my teachers, Jumpo Kondo Dennis Kelly Roshi, who is a real rascal, has been very innovative in bringing the traditional teachings of Zen into our postmodern culture in creative new ways that don't sacrifice the depth of the teaching and the integrity of the lineage. And my other teacher, Ken Wilber, the Zendo that I started here is 18 blocks from his loft, and he has been a deep influence and just expanded my understanding of everything. And that's on top of 50 years of meditating. And I'd read the collected works of Carl Jung by the time I was 24, and it deeply impacted me. So I am so grateful to be here, listening to you.
So should we dive into hearing more challenges? I love how you led the way and dive straight in, Dennis, with those 2 additions to the list. I'm really curious what else.
Someone wrote those down.
Oh, yes.
Someone.
Yeah, compassion versus capitalism, the desire to help at the expense of sustainability, if I captured it right, Dennis. And tradition versus entrepreneurship. Oh, there's a little chat box here. So, yes. Yeah, Dennis has popped them in the chat box. So, yeah. Oops, I'll close that down. So,
Anyone want to add to the list?
Oh, actually, I'll just speak. No, I think that list, the original list in these 2 editions, would make for a really great, 10-day deep talking, listening discussion amongst all of us. So to add more titles to that, I think getting into even just 1 or 2 of them and talking, in depth about our direct experiences with what has been presented so far would carry us through the hour or through the days. I'm not sure how we're going to proceed into them, but I know from my own perspective, working at Brighton Bush, working with our own structures of, you mentioned hierarchies, and working with feelings, maybe even versus data-driven decision-making. One of those polarities you were pointing out, I've been working in this realm for nearly 40 years at Brighton Bush, and at other centers even before that. You know, it's an ongoing. There are struggles involved. Sometimes there are even threatened lawsuits involved, even amongst people who've all come together at this place called Brightonbush. And I know that that's true with other centers as well. So it's a matter of deep truthing, telling the truth. I'll just start by saying that, you know, when I became the business director at Brightonbush, you know, I came in with okay, I'm being hired into a role. So there's a role and then there's me. And from my perspective, I'm going to choose principles over personalities, which is a tough place to be in a situation where everybody knows everybody because we all live together, work together. We're all neighbors, co-workers, and co-owners of the business in which we work and of the place where we all live because we're deep in the wilderness in Oregon. And to choose principles over personalities is a tough thing to do because you can offend people. Even as you put forth the best that you've got in terms of telling the truth and choosing that conscious way. So I'll leave it at that. Just saying, I love this subject, and I spend a lot of my time dealing with this subject in my years here at Brightonbush, and I'm sure everybody else does too, who is in this virtual room together.
Mm. Thank you, Peter.
I have a quick question because I'm sorry, I had to step out for an urgent phone call, but is diversity part of the was it mentioned as a part of the challenges?
Diversity in what way?
Very good question. So from staffing perspective, I am faced right now in a sense of, I find as a challenge, diversity in terms of age, ethnicity, economical, socioeconomic levels, and people that have access to Esalen. So even taking aside from those who are visiting Esalen as seminarians taking workshops, actually staff. So how do, not seeing the person and interviewing and then bringing people with this skill set. So we're shifting a little bit. So, you know, finding more skill and then finding if that's a cultural fit as well through the process. And then finding that majority of people right now coming our way are white males, young white males. And so then I get from young white males on property piece of how are you recruiting all young white males? And so this is the dance at the moment that I'm noticing. So yeah, in those regards, in terms of how do.
Let me just understand a little bit more. Please help me.
Yeah.
So is the problem that you're talking about a lack of diversity?
Correct.
Or a not enough diversity?
A lack of diversity or not enough diversity? It's definitely not enough diversity.
Hmm. So how's that different than a lack of diversity?
To me, I picked the not enough diversity based on what we have and what I see in front of me. And I guess a preference of word the lack of. But to be quite honest, very granular, I can't tell you the difference.
Okay.
I think in some respects too, we are lacking in certain categories, just completely absent.
Mm-hmm.
In general.
So I think understanding what diversity really is the most problematic, and it's where the gold is buried in the transformational communities of tomorrow. So I asked that question for a real difference, and I really appreciate your openness and your honesty that you don't quite understand what the real problem is, but you know there's a problem there.
And I'll second that as well, because I've often wondered if diversity itself is the goal, or if diversity is going to help us achieve another goal. And I struggle with that oftentimes, because we, at least here at the Haven, have focused on diversity as a goal itself. And my question is, well, how does that any different than what we're doing now? Like, how is that going to change anything, or what is it going to change?
And
So I want to tell a story here, if I may. Is that all right?
Yeah, go.
So I was at Findhorn, and I was drawn there by one of the priests in my order, in our order. Excuse me. A little possessiveness there, Coda. You might have noticed that. This is not about me. And I constantly get to remind myself of that. You know, we have this getting the joke. Do you know what the cosmic joke is? It's me. I think I'm so important.
Mm.
Isn't that hilarious? What's really funny is I constantly have to remind myself, even after all this meditation, I'm not the center of the universe.
Punchline never wears off though.
I keep hoping. But that's part of the problem, hope.
Actually, I think that I tell my kids, actually, each one of you is the center of the universe, but you have to remember that you're not the only one. We're all centers of the universe. It makes it more complex.
Yeah, it's much more complex. The two truths doctrine, it's been around for a long time. There's an absolute truth and a relative truth. And we can't ever ignore either or both.
mm,
So this problem of diversity is a really big problem. It's a bigger problem in California, I've noticed, than it is in Europe. Diversity is just a lightning rod in California. And it's not as big a lightning rod in the communities that I teach in Europe. And that's really interesting to me. And there's a difference between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, a very marked difference. But so I was preparing for this retreat we just led at Findhorn, and a couple people, Christine was one of them, suggested that we invite Ken Wilber to speak and on these problems. So the only time that worked was the time that I was scheduled to do a Dharma talk in the Universal Hall. So I asked Ken if he'd be willing to, and he said, yeah. He said, if you think it's a good idea, Do-Shin, I'll be happy to do it to support you. And that's not the answer I wanted. So I prepared very carefully thought out questions, about 20 questions, and I emailed them to him that I felt would be really important to go into this stuff. And he answered them in writing. You know, he's getting a little older, and he's having to prepare his thoughts before he just spurts them out. And it was a profound 30-page essay that really addresses many of the problems that we face pushing the edge of transformation. All of us, from a very, what I would call a high cosmic address. It's certainly higher than my perspective, certainly more evolved than anything I can conceive. And he immediately went to a common denominator. He said, oh, all these questions and these communities that are on the list of the Holistic Center Network are postmodern egalitarian communities.
Okay.
That's the common denominator. And what's the biggest issue in a postmodern egalitarian community? Diversity. But what is diversity? And more importantly, what is a performative contradiction? Does anybody have any idea? Let's just open the first, let's split it into two questions. What is diversity?
to me, diversity is people around me. Well, first, I assume it's humans. That's an interesting assumption. So it's humans around me that are not like me in various forms, actually. Can be shape, color, background, how they were, like, actually so this sounds to me a lot wider than a couple of criteria that I described to you at the beginning of this question already. So that's very interesting. Yeah. So they're not like me. So for me, diversity is not seen. But that's my story, by the way, because all I'm doing is I'm seeing through my eyes and I'm making a story in my head. Because just how they were raised, I have no idea how they were raised. So we may be totally polar opposite, but we might look similar, you know, with dark hair and fair skin and be from the same country I'm from and still have diversity. So this is interesting for me to think. Thank you for the question.
Well, I'll jump in. Diversity, we're just about, at Brightonbush, we're about to do a training, a diversity training. What is that? You know, anti-oppression and diversity training. Most of the people who live and work at Brightonbush are white, Caucasian. They come from what I would consider to be fairly middle class background socioeconomically. But there have been some issues that raised up in the last year or two with people saying, "Oh, you're a white middle class group of people creating a space for more white middle class people, and that's not diverse. And we live in a diverse society with different economic and racial backgrounds that are not reflected in the people who work at Brightonbush, nor are they particularly well reflected in the people who visit Brightonbush. So you got to get out of that rut if you're going to be relevant. And you know, those challenges, you know, and it goes deep into, say, some of them are go beyond challenges to accusations. So we're going to be talking about that deeply in about 3 weeks at this training that we've set up with an international person coming in. So this is a really relevant subject. I'll leave it at that. I'm interested in other thoughts.
Just a thought, just riffing on that relative and the absolute truths. I mean, in the absolute perspective, you know, perhaps there is no diversity whatsoever. And, you know, from the relative perspective, all it is diversity. And that's all we have. So then holding those two together is the real, that's where it gets juicy and reminding. And then, you know, that diversity, I think about, like, then there's external characteristics and internal characteristics. There's, we have some, you know, and then there's background and whatnot. But I mean, and then there's, even if you're into the whole Buddhist thing, there's even karma and then lifetimes and who knows, you know, where. So it kind of goes deep. It's even beyond this life where I grew up, but how am I being influenced by all my previous interactions? And so I think it's an interesting question, but what I've noticed about it with our company, because we're Canadian, and I look around and, you know, we're all white, and I also practice in the Shambhala Buddhist tradition, and we're all white. I have to say, it's weird, but it's mostly true, and you know, and wealthy, and it's almost like the ones who had the opportunities could go in there and do that kind of practice and pay for those retreats and access to the teachings. But so there is, you know, it's kind of like holding the two. It's like, how do we break out of that mold? And at the same time, if I have a conversation with anybody, I realize I'm talking to somebody profoundly different than me in almost every capacity. So even though they might even share a lot of external characteristics. So it's just interesting to kind of, I'm enjoying this conversation because it's challenging. Kind of, sometimes I kind of stop short and think, well, background, age, race, demographic, that's, oh, now I fixated, I know who you are. And that sort of gives me some ease because now I know who you are. And so that's also an edge to play with, is maybe we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had another question as well, Doshin, and I'm just aware we're over halfway through the call, so I'm wondering whether you want to ask your other question or we go on to the slides, but just a time awareness. I could add something, but
Yes.
I'd love us to.
Yes. I think I'd like to bring this conversation to a closure, just for time constraints, by pointing out two different types of diversity. And the common belief in postmodern egalitarianism is that everybody's equal.
Yeah.
Is that true? If I act as though that's true, if I believe it's true, I've created a performative contradiction because everybody's not equal. And the problems that I've listed, collaborative decision-making, oversensitivity, emphasis on feelings, lack of accountability, rejection of hierarchies, are all karmic consequences of this belief that everybody's equal when everybody is not equal. This is a huge problem that nobody has addressed that I've seen but Ken Wilber adequately. And he's very reluctant to talk about it because you get arrows in your back. It is a difficult conversation to have. You know, Kodo has tons to say about this. The Mankind Project, when they brought diversity into the training, it really created all kinds of interesting unfoldings. And he single-handedly saved that organization from bankruptcy, in my opinion, humble opinion. He won't say that, but I will. So there's another aspect to diversity that's really important. There's a gentleman by the name of Alan Watkins, who's a business consultant in London, that wrote a book called Wicked and Wise, which is a wonderful open discussion about these wicked problems that just defy solutions in this age that we live in. And then his next book was Crowdocracy, and it's a replacement for democracy, theoretically. And what he noticed is when you have a group that really has diversity, I mean, the more diverse, the better, and you eliminate what everybody thinks, and you rely upon the wisdom of the heart, you will get better advice from that group in their heartfelt wisdom than you will from a whole school of experts. And that's been my experience. You know, I would love to take this group right here and just open our hearts and really open a discussion about the problems that thinking everybody is equal creates. And you know, just relying on our heartfelt wisdom and a whiteboard, get us all in the same room where we can connect with the energy of our hearts. And that would be a fascinating discussion. So those two things, creating a false belief that everybody's equal and then living as though it were true when it's not, I can't appreciate someone's differences if I believe that they're equal. I can't teach them. I can't lead them. There's so many things that can't happen if I just limit my belief to everybody's equal. And that's what creates so many of the problems that you're all facing. And it's not a necessary belief. I personally believe that everyone deserves equal respect. And that's how I live my life. That doesn't require that I believe everybody's equal and treat them as though they are and do a huge disservice to them and ignore their individual differences. But I do believe that the moral right thing to do is treat everyone with equal dignity.
Yes, but let me ask you this. Tatiana brought up a question earlier on saying, okay, in a place like Esalen, and you pointed out California can be more difficult than other places when it comes to the appearances and the functions of around diversity. So Tatiana is in personnel, and she is expected to bring in people of diverse racial and gender differences, to have those reflected in the staff, and yet she's dealing with mostly young white males, probably coming from a certain socioeconomic background. What is she to do? I mean, how does what get reflected in her little problem that she has there?
Yeah, my condolences to you, Tatiana. You're in a difficult position, and I don't envy you a bit. I have great compassion for you, and I have no easy answers for that question. Mm-hmm. There aren't any. This is a cultural change. How do you change a culture like California's culture? How do you turn a battleship in a rowboat is really the scope of that question. Mm-hmm. We're not going to solve that today.
No.
And my heart goes out to you. You are between a rock and a hard place. And boy, you're going to learn a lot is all I can say.
That's for sure.
That's for sure.
Deep compassion towards you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So that's the question of diversity. And I forgot what the second half of that was. Does anybody remember? I'm getting old.
Well, I think you talked about diversity and performative contradictions, which you've touched on there. So
yeah.
You asked what we understand by performative contradictions. That was the second question.
Oh, isn't that a great question? Yeah, let's listen to that.
Before we talk about performative contradictions, just in response to what you said, it speaks to me of what one of my teachers has spoken of the distinction between loving kindness and compassion. And I'm equating treating everyone with dignity or respect as loving kindness. And yet compassion, rooted in the heart, calls for discernment, for wise action. And I definitely have experienced that we focus a lot on the loving kindness in society as a fault, and somehow have turned what I consider to, if it's coming from the heart, compassionate action into exclusiveness, and that's wrong. And I feel like my work as a practitioner has been around embracing training and learning and making mistakes and being willing to hear and listen to others, and bringing those practices into our workplace and into what is often a transactional experience can become very muddied, and I feel like that's the views behind where we start are really critical for the results that we experience.
Yes. And I couldn't agree with you more. It is muddy, it's difficult work, and it's always messy. And pure discernment is the sixth consciousness. If we want to use the 8 consciousnesses of Vajrayana and Chan, the sixth consciousness, our ability to evaluate with likes and dislikes, emotions, and categories of goods and bads, must be transmuted into the perfect wisdom of pure discernment that is beyond likes and dislikes. It's beyond categories of good and bad. It's Rumi's field, beyond all polar opposites. Now, people trying to live that way and still caught in the polarities of their dualistic minds will fall short. And if they lie to themselves and say I'm dualistic when I'm not, I'm non-dual when I'm dualistic, then we create a performative contradiction.
That's right.
And that's where the muddiness in the war comes from. And blessings to these teachers who really are beyond the polarities and are living from the pure wisdom of pure discernment. I bow to all the Buddhas. And I have great compassion for the rest of us.
Yeah, thank you.
Doshin, I wondered about, with the 15 minutes, it's amazing how quickly an hour can go. We looked at the slides before everyone came on the call. I would love it if we could continue on with those slides.
Oh,
would you?
You are a troublemaker, Christine. Okay. Is that acceptable to everybody? Is that? Yeah. So this actually, I would really encourage this turning into a greater program that we could lead. I mean, you put a nickel in this jukebox and I could play for hours. And we've spent a lot of time, Kodo and I, developing material on this very tough subject that we're just not even opening the covers to. So this I put together in a few minutes before this call. So here are our common challenges and dysfunctions. Now let's take these issues and let's look at what are the underlying problems. Collaborative decision-making. Boy, that's difficult, if not impossible. What is the problem? Well, the problem making decisions is quite difficult. Oversensitivity. What is the real problem? Well, the real problem is you can't be real with anyone. You have to be nice. That eliminates being real. You can't tell the truth. Emphasis on feelings. Well, what that means often is nothing gets done. That's the real problem. We just sit around and talk about how we feel. I mean, how many of us have been in groups like this? All of us. A lack of accountability. Well, the real problem is no one accepts responsibility. That's the real problem. You can't depend upon anybody to do anything. Business can't get done under those circumstances. The rejection of hierarchies. The real problem is there is no effective leadership. If we reject all hierarchies, leadership is not possible. Not effective leadership. In the limited financial sustainability, the real problem is we're perpetuating a victim mentality. We're enabling each other to remain victims. That's a real problem. So the issues, problems, underlying beliefs that are causing those problems, and the medicine that might cure them, in my view, will cure them, because we are actually deeply involved in curing these issues, problems, and coming up with the next generation of underlying beliefs that are more evolved. So the issue, collaborative decision-making, the problem, making decisions is difficult. The underlying belief that is causing the problem, everyone must be heard. Is that really true? Are we going to give equal weight to the voice of people that are not as evolved? I mean, again, this is a problem that
who gets to say?
there needs to be a hierarchy. There are people who have more to say. They have more wisdom. They have more experience. And we must be able to listen to these people and learn from them. So it requires, the medicine is we have to admit that everyone is different. And that doesn't mean we don't have to give everybody equal respect. That is a moral responsibility, a moral, it's loving kindness.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's an embodiment of loving kindness. Oversensitivity can't be real with anyone. The underlying belief that causes that problem is a belief that we must be nice at all costs. Well, frankly, that is just the worst thing you can do to me, is be nice to me. I'd much rather you tell me the truth. And I realize that's unusual. Most people don't feel that way. So I'm very careful. I'm very careful to ask somebody if they really want me to tell them the truth before I burden them with that. But please, if you're dealing with me, always be real. Nice is way down on the totem pole of importance to me. I value realness over niceness, and I find that to be medicine to this problem. Emphasis on feelings. Nothing gets done is the problem. Emotional narcissism is the belief. It's believing that my feelings are the most important thing in the world, which is really another way of saying that I am the center of the universe, that I am the most important thing. So the medicine is get over yourself and your feelings. Get the cosmic joke. A lack of accountability. No one accepts responsibility. And the causing belief is you can't criticize anyone. You can't give people any positive criticism. And the medicine to that is be willing to be uncomfortable. This is so important. And this is so much a part of the Tibetan Vajrayana path. Be willing to not turn away, no matter what. Limited financial sustainability. Victim mentality is enabled. So the causing belief, I believe, in this Western culture is I must be saved. I can't save myself. Take responsibility for your actions and the impact your actions have. This is the medicine.
And hierarchies, Doshin, just to go back.
Did I miss hierarchies?
Yeah, I'm interested in that one.
Okay, so, oops, where did the hierarchies go?
There we go. Rejection.
I'm not seeing them on, rejection of hierarchies. Yes, no effective leadership. That is the problem. And this causing belief is that all hierarchies are bad. This is just not true. And at the next level of consciousness, above postmodern pluralism, you can begin to see that there's a huge difference between man-made hierarchies and growth hierarchies, which are part of the natural order. And the medicine for this no effective leadership is to start educating people about growth hierarchies, growth holarchies, and the evolutionary nature of consciousness that is invisible at postmodern egalitarianism. They don't see it. And this is the critical thing that will break open this problem of diversity, where the performative contradiction is we are prejudiced against prejudice, which is actually an evolution. I salute it. But we can't see our own prejudice against prejudice. This is a performative contradiction. When we admit that we have a prejudice against lower levels of development, like ISIS, like gangs, like the jihads, the beliefs that are rigid and mean and violent that lead to violent behavior and war. And we have a preference for the hierarchies that begin with modernity and postmodernity, and then the integral hierarchies. This is where we begin to see that our preferences for evolution take precedence over the importance of diversity. Diversity is not enough of an understanding. It's only a half-truth. So, I mean, we could spend a 6-month workshop and retreat on that subject. So the solution is really educate, 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 which is something that all the transformational communities of today can become the transformational communities of tomorrow if they just change what they're educating about. Here's some suggestions. Integral theory. Understand what aperspectival madness is, which is the disease of postmodern egalitarianism, according to Wilber. Really struggle to understand what he's saying here. It's deeply profound and transformational. Nihilism, narcissism, performance contradictions, individual and collective shadows, addictions and allergies, and states and stages, and what drives them. You know, the kleshas, the traumas, the karma that drives our addictions and allergies in both states and structures of development. Conflict liberation and polarity dynamics, and what he calls integral semiotics. These are topics that will become the study of the next age for the next several hundred years. Integrating Zen, my favorite. What would a fourth turning of Buddhism look like? What would it need to integrate to add everything we've learned in the last 1,000 years since all the Buddhist doctrines were dogmatized? There, I did it.
Yay. Brilliant.
So that was off the top of my head before this call. And it results from the transmission that I received from Wilber that was psychodynamic. I mean, it's psychoactive. What I gained by my discourse with him and putting myself under the pressure of going into what I considered a bit of a hostile environment at Findhorn, who was not willing to hear what I was going to say and what the retreat that I was going to bring. And it started out messy, didn't it, Christine?
It was a bit bumpy.
I got a little triggered.
Yeah,
it was a bit bumpy. That's a kindness. The first 2 days were messy. And by the end, it was magnificent.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And I feel for what's going on at Human Resources in California.
Doshin, in these 2 minutes, oh, sorry, Peter, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's not just California. You know, we're dealing with very much similar things as what Tatiana.
West Coast.
Go ahead.
Doshin, I was wondering when you're going to join us for a center's gathering in the flesh.
I would love to. I would expect when I'm invited.
He's been invited. There is an invitation has been extended. So
Wonderful.
Doshin, in 2 minutes, could you say you went through quite a journey yourself with your experience at Findhorn, and then you learned to embrace some aspects.
Yes.
Could you kind of say that in a nutshell of what that was?
Oh, I would love to. You know, in Zen, we have a saying, send me to hell quickly. Let me see how awake I am. And I discovered I wasn't as awake as I thought I was, because I was reacting. And I love, one of my favorite Vajrayana teachers is Daniel P. Brown. And I went to a retreat at Mount Madonna with Daniel. Lovely. Hanuman. I love Hanuman. And He has a different way of translating the Tibetan word for dukkha and the Sanskrit word of dukkha. He translates it as reactivity. My reactivity, my ego contractions, is what causes my suffering. That was profoundly meaningful to me. So I noticed that I wanted to go to Findhorn because I knew I was entering a battleground that they didn't realize was a battleground. And I was going to trigger their beliefs with my traditional Zen form, as well as my integral beliefs, which aren't any better. They're just maybe a little more evolved, maybe not, but it seems to me they are. And I noticed that I got triggered. So I wouldn't have known that had I not stepped into the fire. Because I stepped into the fire, I was able to do this, which is my teacher's teaching that is the core of all my teaching. This is an ego contraction. This is perfect round mirror of perfect wisdom, pure discernment, spontaneous action, and non-duality or equality. This is what it takes to make a Buddha. This is a practice that I call conflict liberation. Your conflicts, where the polarities that you're battling, your conflicts can liberate you. Your conflicts, your angst can be your liberation, as my teacher says. And that's been my path of awakening. Every time this happens, that I notice, as soon as pure awareness discerns that this is here, the most natural thing in the world happens. Yes. Bodhicitta. It's not rocket science. It's just difficult. I love Findhorn.
Me too.
And what I had to own was my own postmodern egalitarianism that I had disowned and pretended I didn't have. That's what I walked away from that retreat with. It's not transcend and exclude that. It's transcend and include that, which is what I did. And that was the gift that I left with. Thank you.
Thank you, Doshin. And I love how you came full circle there. You started with bodhicitta, and then we came back to bodhicitta. And it's 6 o'clock, and that, thank you. This filled the gap that I felt with the talk with Ken Wilber that night. It was just the tip of the iceberg, and I was craving more. And I feel like we've really opened up into more in this hour, and I'm hugely grateful for you joining us. Thank you. And for all of you for joining this conversation. So thank you for making the time out of your day. I will send the recording round to everybody. I'd love to keep the conversation going, and I would love to explore what we can possibly do next with you, Doshin, to help us evolve. So,
Yes.
and please share with your centers, share feedback, and we'll stay in touch. And maybe Doshin and Kodo, we can stay on the call, and if you have a little bit of time just to debrief. And anyone else is welcome to, but we do want to honor the time that it's now 6 o'clock. So, well, it's 6 o'clock here at Findhorn. The hour is up. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Deepest gratitude.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ratna. Thank you. Okay. So a few of us are still here. Kodo, how is this for you?
I so deeply appreciate seeing organizations who are willing to open up and be uncomfortable and say what needs to happen. That was my work with Mankind Project, and it's just it is so encouraging to me to see this kind of work being done. So deep gratitude for allowing to be kind of audit, see what's happening.
No, it was a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you. I've heard Doshin talk very warmly of you on many occasions. So, and the incredible work that you did with the Mankind Project of turning it around.
The game's still out. I mean, the verdict
Well,
jury.
it's ongoing. It's ongoing. So
that's right. But I really, really hope that everybody takes what you said to heart, and that's to continue the conversation. Continue this conversation, and as Doshin says, this is all psychoactive. As I understand, the retreat was for you.
Oh yes. I'm still being with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, congratulations and my condolences.
Oh, on some level, I'd said yes to it. So.
Yeah, it's very good.
And I keep saying yes to it. So, yes.
That's the key.
Yep. Absolutely.
Always yes. Open, more open, deeper, more deeper.
And
so what an incredibly wonderful forum you've got going.
It's amazing, and I still feel there are so many centers out there, but we are engaging more and more. And I mean, it was brilliant to have these centers on the call this evening, and there's a deep sense of connection between us, and there is so much that we have in common. And what's great is that we have the annual gathering, but now we have these monthly webinars, and I hope that we will develop into online courses. For me, this is a taste of what we could develop into, and the spirit of the gathering is a spirit of collaboration. And thank you, Doshin, for that PowerPoint that you put together. Brilliant. That so met my need. Thank you.